Well, it was sort of a little unexpected, but it's been a very interesting few days on the markets. In particular, it sort of seems to be gaining greater prominence as people pick up that there's some unusual instabilities in different markets around the world. Today, the Australian dollar plunged against other major currencies, falling to an 8-month low against the US dollar. I was one of those who was going, 90 cents US, please, please. But it's dropped back. Looking at my finance screen now, it's 83 cents against the US dollar. Today there's been a massive sell-off with ongoing concerns about Europe's debt crisis driving investors away from currencies perceived as a higher risk. Now, just why Australia's dollar would be a higher risk is beyond me, but there you go. The share market's taken another hit today with stocks losing, I think it was 1.6%. The All Ordinary slipped about, doesn't matter, it slipped. There's a number of interesting things happening around the world, so I invited my honorary unpaid financial advisor to the evening program, Chris Leithner from Leithner and Associates, to join me once again and perhaps give some background to what's happening. Chris, thanks for coming in once again.
Thanks very much for having me.
Some significant stock market instability at the moment, both here and overseas. Well, not really here, but it's certainly sliding, but overseas on the European shares.
True. People are catching up with the notion that not all is well in the world. Roughly 12 months, 18 months ago, politicians in effect stood up, much like George W. Bush did on the aircraft carrier, and said, economically, mission accomplished. Don't you worry about that. There have been problems in 2007, 2008, but thanks to our interventions, that's all been sorted. There are blue skies ahead now. I exaggerate slightly, of course, but they gave the impression that massive government intervention could resolve the problems caused by decades of government intervention. And it seems to me that slowly but surely people are coming to the realization that government intervention makes those initial problems even worse. Problems in the banking sector were swept under the rug, namely under the government's rug. Governments vastly increased their debt, and now people are beginning to think, or beginning to realize, goodness me, governments are heavily indebted, and what we thought were very safe investments, namely government's bonds, in actual fact, are not nearly as safe as we thought. So in other words, nothing much has changed. The underlying causes of all of these problems continue to stare us in the face. And as people begin to confront that reality, one sees instability in stock markets, bond markets, and so on.
The Greece or the Greek bailout money or the EU bailout money for Greece is greater than the entire Australian economy. And that's just to ensure that Greece doesn't default on its loans, let alone stabilising the wider European currency, the euro.
Initially, there was great euphoria. Many hosannas were sung, $1 trillion US or the equivalent thereof in very rough terms. And people would think to themselves, gee, that's a gargantuan amount of money. But then after several days, well, from where comes this money? And the first answer is that it's conjured basically out of thin air. It's not as if $1 trillion or thereabouts sits in the vaults of the European Central Bank. So that's point one. And in effect, more funny money has been created to address the problems of existing funny money. Point two is that technically all of this is illegal under various sorts of European treaties. So various subterfuges have been followed. They're called, basically off-balance sheet sorts of investment vehicles, which governments denounced about 18 months to 2 years ago when Citibank, American, British, and European banks used those same sorts of underlying structures. So
federal governments are doing what they denounced companies for doing in the in the lead up to the global financial crisis.
The underlying structure is very similar.
Okay.
And it's the old story that allegedly when private sector people do it and becomes unstuck, woe betide them, and politicians stomp their feet and denounce them. But there exists some bizarre parallel universe or parallel law of morality whereby governments, without blushing or without batting an eyelid, can do precisely the same sorts of things, and people are supposed to applaud them for their efforts.
Germany has banned short selling, and that has made the markets even more jittery. They were expecting it would calm people a bit in Europe, but it's made markets over there more jittery.
Well, if one doesn't want person B to receive bad news from person A, one will say, let's put blindfolds or let's attach earmuffs to them. We'd laugh and say how absurd and silly that is. The Germans now, like Americans did, like Brits did 18 months to 2 years ago, denouncing symptoms, that's to say actions of speculators. They're refusing to address underlying causes, namely that governments have lived well beyond taxpayers' means. And so to address the alleged source of this problem, which isn't the source of the problem at all, the actions of speculators. They are banning certain actions by speculators. The trouble, though, is that speculators are like the ugly little fish that eat up the stuff at the bottom of the aquarium. They're ugly and so on, but you got to have them in an aquarium to have pretty colourful fish and so on. And governments are making fools of themselves. So in other words, one can ban X, one can ban Y, one can ban Z. It's as if there's some sort of a problem. Look, there's a problem with murder, we're going to ban murder, as if that's going to resolve the problem. Certain types of people don't like certain types of activities, will simply ban it, as if suddenly, by passing a law, by passing a regulation, that's going to suddenly make the problem disappear.
Here in Australia, our currency, by my calculation, has slid around 4 cents since the announcement of the federal government's super profits tax. It's roughly around 4 cents. Are they connected?
Many things economically are interconnected, so the short answer is yes. Exactly how they are connected, that's a more difficult question to answer. But
I'm not going to ask that one.
That's right. I've been surprised, I suppose, and in my middle age I shouldn't be surprised by much, but getting that way I am. A government which, by and large, does not consult with big elephants. When those big elephants become stroppy because they haven't been consulted, they're going to say and do certain types of things. When those said elephants are sufficiently big, people around the world take heed and listen, so that suddenly Australia risks having the reputation of a country that's not particularly has not rolled out the welcome mat to miners. Now, if that's something in which you specialize, if that's something which you do better than most people in the world, you have to think twice